Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C-Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. A while back, I talked about my top 5 favorite Wes Craven movies, and in that video, I mentioned that while those 5 movies are still amazing, he isn't my favorite horror director. Not to say that Wes Craven was a bad director, but many of his movies just aren't that appealing, and that they have too many problems for me to enjoy. However, one director that I find myself coming back to a lot is another master of the horror genre, that being John Carpenter. To me, John Carpenter has always had a unique and fun style whenever I watch any of his movies. He always tried something new and different, whether it be his classic horror movies like The Thing and Halloween, to some of his lesser known works like Starman and Prince of Darkness. So today, I want to honor this man for giving us so many fun and classic movies by counting down my top 10 favorite John Carpenter movies. As I've stated before, these are my opinions, so if I don't mention a movie that you guys think should be on here, too bad. And these movies must have been directed by John Carpenter, no producing credits. And with that out of the way, here are my top 10 favorite John Carpenter movies. Number 10. Prince of Darkness. Kicking things off, this movie is the second in John Carpenter's self-titled Apocalypse trilogy, where he directed 3 movies that each end with an apocalyptic setting, and each of them will be appearing at some point on this list. But for the second movie of this trilogy, I have to say it's an interesting and creepy movie. The movie follows a scientist and his students who are invited by a priest, played by Donald Pleasance, to research an ancient cylinder of green liquid that, after much studying, contains Satan, and he is starting to wake up. The movie has a lot of the creepy atmosphere the other movies in the trilogy have, with the ever-looming presence that this cylinder has and how it corrupts those around it, by having the local homeless population be drawn to the church where the cylinder is kept, as well as Satan slipping into one of the scientist's dreams where he controls her to free him. I just love how moody the atmosphere in this movie is, and the scenes between Donald Pleasance and the head scientist, played by Victor Wong, are honestly some of the best examples of when religion and science come together. They can help each other out for the common good and don't have to constantly bicker and whine about whose views are right and wrong. The only reason why this movie is so low on the list is that sadly, the movie is a little slow in places and does feel like it drags. But the characters, the creepy atmosphere, the music, and the effects are what really hold this movie up for me. Number 9. The Ward. This is one movie that may confuse a lot of people, as many consider this one of John Carpenter's worst films. But in my opinion, it's a movie that I think gets overlooked by most of his fans, despite the film having a premise that has been done by better directors. The movie follows a young girl who gets sent to an insane asylum where she and the other inmates are being attacked by a mysterious creature. Like I said, the premise of the movie is nothing special, as I've seen movies that are very similar, like Dark Floors and Asylum. But I still think that this movie is creative and has a lot of likable characters that make you want to watch where the movie is going. The only thing about this movie that I think doesn't work is that the twist ending is kind of obvious if you pay enough attention. But that's the only negative I have about the movie, and look at it this way, at least this is John Carpenter's last directed movie and not, Ghosts of Mars. Number 8. In the Mouth of Madness. Moving on to the final part of the Apocalypse trilogy, this movie is basically John Carpenter's attempt at doing an original H.P. Lovecraft story, and he really nails the tone and style of Mr. Lovecraft. Sam Neill of Jurassic Park fame plays an insurance investigator who's asked by a book publisher of their hottest author, Sutter Kane, to find him as he disappeared, and they believe he's using his disappearance as a publicity stunt. However, Mr. Neill ends up discovering that Sutter Kane has basically discovered a doorway to a horror plane, and that soon it'll be seeping into our world. As someone who's seen/read very few stories that were written by H.P. Lovecraft, I can say that John Carpenter really nails the look and feel of what a Lovecraft story is like. With his look into weird creatures and how people start to go insane with the invasion of the outer gods, including Sam Neill himself when Kane starts changing everything around him, and Sam's reaction to the changes are both hilarious and terrifying, leaving us with a somber and quite horrifying ending, which is something that John Carpenter is a master of doing. While I felt that Prince of Darkness was a bit slow and didn't make quite as much sense, this movie takes the Lovecraftian writing style and just runs with it, which is in my opinion the best thing you can do for a movie like this. Number 7. Christine. One of the many Stephen King adaptations that is iconic for the effects and the music. The movie follows a young nerdy kid named Arnie who is constantly bullied and harassed by his peers, until he and his best friend find an old 1958 Plymouth Fury that he buys and restores. However, Arnie starts to change for the worse as the car seems to influence him into acting like a greaser and becomes more and more violent and possibly is killing his bullies off with his new car, who he finds out is named Christine. The thing about the movie that I like is that it takes more liberties with the book and makes the movie more of a murder mystery, where John has you guess if the killer really is Arnie or if it's Christine herself. I won't give the twist away just in case some of you haven't seen the movie, but I will say that the movie's twist is a lot more interesting and believable than the book's reason for why Arnie kills. Number 6. Escape from New York. Another post-apocalyptic movie that gave us the look of one of video gaming's greatest heroes, and a great movie to boot as well. The movie takes place in an alternate future version of the US where crime has become so terrible that the government has turned New York into one of the largest maximum security prisons, which the president has fallen into after Air Force One was hijacked by terrorists. It's now up to ex-Special Forces agent now turned prisoner Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell, to go in and save the president within 24 hours so that he will be pardoned for his crimes. This is a movie that really shows that John Carpenter was more than a master of horror, but also a great writer of the action genre as well. I like how this movie, and others like it, takes you through what could have been a potentially horrifying world where everything you know ended, as well as having something like New York City as a prison be more akin to a large ghetto community that has its own rules and regulations. With there being a duke who rules over all of New York, but there are certain areas he doesn't have a grip on which are led by insurgents that just want a peaceful life. Which is also the best part of the movie with its amazing cast of characters. From the gruff and tired Snake that just wants this job over and done with, to the Duke of New York, played by Isaac Hayes, who wants the special briefcase that the president has which controls all of the US's nuclear missiles, and to my favorite side character, Cabby, who is just a man trying to survive in the crazy prison society. It's such an interesting look into what many people in the 80s thought the future would turn out to be, and I love it for the creative world we got from movies like these. Number 5. Big Trouble in Little China. The wacky and weird love letter to the martial arts films of the 70s, this is one of my favorite comfort John Carpenter films that's just a funny, turn-your-brain-off kind of flick that has some really great action in it. The movie follows a trucker named Jack Burton, played by Kurt Russell, who gets thrown into a strange and mystical world involving an ancient sorcerer, saving some girls with green eyes, and Jack trying to get back his truck. The movie is one that doesn't take itself too seriously and is just a fun tribute to the old kung fu action movies from the 70s, where those movies focused more on the action and fights rather than any major plot or themes. I do like, though, that even though Kurt Russell is the main lead of the movie, he acts more like a side character that got thrown into the movie last minute, which does fit for how the movie is written, with having him and a friend of his getting thrown into a magical world of Chinese sorcery. It's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but I still love it for the amazing fights and fun characters. Number 4. The Fog. This is one I'm very surprised isn't talked about more, as it's one of John's best early horror movies. The movie takes place in the small town of Antonio Bay as the townspeople begin to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the town's founding. Unfortunately, there are some who aren't too happy about the anniversary, as some ghosts from the founding fathers' past have returned to seek revenge on their descendants for the crimes that their forefathers committed. The movie is once again a really creepy and moody film, with the ghosts being surrounded in the fog, and the only thing you can see is the shape of them and their glowing red eyes. I love that these ghosts can just about move into any space so long as the fog can reach it. The characters, I will admit, aren't the most interesting in some of the other John Carpenter movies that I've seen, but they have their moments. Especially the beginning with an old sailor telling the legend to some kids, and then they're never seen again. Number 3. The Thing. The final Apocalypse trilogy movie, and it's, of course, in my top 3 of the best movies made by John Carpenter. For the three of you who haven't seen this movie, it follows a group of researchers in the Antarctic who wind up getting involved with a separate group of Norwegian researchers that are chasing what is believed to be a dog, but it turns out to be an alien that has been stuck in the ice for over 1,000 years and wants to assimilate our heroes in order to take over all of the Earth. The one thing to note is that this movie is the second adaptation of the short story Who Goes There, the first adaptation being from 1951, The Thing from Another World. In my opinion, this movie is a much better and scarier version than the original, as that movie hasn't aged that well and is a product of its time. But the John Carpenter version is a lot more terrifying, with the idea of having a creature that can imitate anyone perfectly, including animals, making it hard to tell who to trust in a place as isolated as the Antarctic. Which is made even more scary with how well the characters are written and how they have to deal with this situation, which, suffice it to say, does not end well for most of the researchers. Number 2. Halloween. Once again, like my top 5 Wes Craven movies list, while I still love this movie and the legacy it has created, it just isn't my all-time favorite. I don't think I need to explain the plot, as most people know about this movie, but for those of you who may not have seen it, the movie tells the story of a young boy named Michael Myers, who on Halloween killed his older sister and was sent to an insane asylum for 15 years. Where he escapes and goes back to his hometown where he starts his reign of terror again. The movie has an interesting production history, as it has a sort of connection to the 1974 film Black Christmas, in that John Carpenter was interested in making a sequel with the director, Bob Clark, at the time. But eventually we ended up with a movie that helped start the 80s slasher movie craze. I will say that while this is one of the earliest examples of the slasher genre, it does have a different feel to it that makes it stand out from what we've come to know as the tropes of the genre. With this movie, we focus on the characters a lot, and unlike something from the Friday the 13th series, we get to know these characters and their personalities outside of being dumb, horny teenagers that just want to party. Plus, we get to see Michael's journey of him going back to his hometown, and how he gains most of the things that made his look iconic. It really is an interesting, characterish study of a serial killer that has no motivation other than to kill, which is something that the sequels and many of the remakes don't understand about him, as he's referred to in the movie and the end credits as the boogeyman or the shape, cause he's not something we're supposed to understand and relate to because he's a monster, and one that has lasted in the minds of children during the Halloween season. Number 1. They Live. Yeah, we're going with another obscure movie from John Carpenter's library, and it's one that is very relevant in today's society. A drifter, played by legendary Canadian wrestler Roddy Piper, stumbles upon a group of people who are trying to reveal the truth about how the rich and powerful are really aliens that have destroyed our world with corruption and commercialism. Which leads to him and another person he met, played by Keith David, to joining the cause to fight and expose the aliens to the world. One thing that I've noticed when watching movies like this is how relevant they are in modern day. This movie doesn't just delve into the oversaturated commercialism of the 80s, it also deals with how the Great Recession affected middle to low-income families, with many of them losing their jobs and being forced to live in shantytowns. With the upper classes just continuing their lives and not caring about how everyone else lives in these dire times. Which is what John Carpenter was able to capture with this movie, as it's a great oppressed rising up to fight against an unfair and unjust world. Plus, I love all of the fights between the aliens and the police they control against the people who are trying to lead simple lives, but can't because of the oppression placed on them by the rich and powerful. That's what I feel John Carpenter is able to capture in his movies. His characters are close to real people who just want something normal in their lives, but they have to fight against powerful forces in order to get it, and sometimes they don't always live to the end to enjoy the victory. But at least they didn't die in vain when we do see their victory. Well, travelers, those are my top 10 favorite John Carpenter movies. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.